Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our program today. My name is Michelle Massey. I am the Director of Public Programs at the Museum of Russian Art. And it's an honor to be able to connect with you virtually today. We've been doing virtual program for the last year, of course, just like everyone else. And I will say that, although we prefer to see you all in person and join with you, this has been such a wonderful opportunity to be able to have conversations like we're going to have today and have access to people from all over the country and all over the world, and to be able to share what the Museum of Russian Art is about with people beyond our galleries. So I'm actually seated in the galleries, so to speak, right now, and that is to say that the galleries are open for viewing right now. We have 4 exhibitions on view right now, and we're thrilled to be featuring these brand new exhibitions that were just installed in February and March. Now, that said, if you're safely at home or if you're not local, we do offer virtual programming for our exhibitions as well. And often we feature virtual tours with the curator and with the artists themselves. So please, you can go to our website at TMORA.org and look under programming. You'll find our virtual event archive, and that's where you'll see all those virtual tours. We also have some virtual tours of our exhibitions coming up in the coming weeks of our new exhibitions, and you can see that on our events page. So, that said, now we're going to get to today's program, which is the first in a series. This is different from any other program that we've done. We are taking this opportunity to work with our wonderful colleague, Denis Evstuhin, and this amazing panel we have today to explore in conversation and in sound wonderful Russian composers and their masterpieces. So today we are going to be focusing on Mussorgsky, and I'm very, very excited for this panel. And I think this is just such a wonderful opportunity. So I want you to know that you are able to ask questions today by using your chat function. You simply can just type your questions in. I will be monitoring those questions as we go, but we'll save time at the very end to really get into the Q&A. We are slated to go for 1 hour and 15 minutes today, and this session is being recorded. So if you would like to share this program with other people, we would love it, and we will be posting it on our YouTube channel and on our website. So these questions will live in infamy if you want them answered today. You are part of shaping the conversation. Just know that when you send it in the chat box, the only people that could see it are the panelists. So now it's time for me to introduce you to my wonderful colleague who is the moderator for today's program. He's Russian-born and internationally acclaimed pianist who has performed in major cities on incredibly prestigious stages throughout Russia, Europe, and the US, including the Great Hall of Tchaikovsky Conservatory in Moscow, the Great Philharmonic Hall, and the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. In 2010, he founded the classical music program at the Museum of Russian Art, and many of you may be fans of the classical music program here. He has organized and participated in over 60 programs with internationally acclaimed musicians like Minnesota Orchestra's music director, Asma Vonska, concertmaster Aaron Keefe, and principal cellist Anthony Ross, among many, many others. Please let me introduce you to Denis Evstuhin.
Thank you, Michelle.
Looks like we have a little technical. You got it okay?
Thank you, Michelle.
There you go.
I'm very honored to be here today.
Oh, Denis, you still have an echo.
Yeah, I'm afraid the echo is coming from me, and I don't know.
Timur, do you want to just go ahead and start while we figure this out?
Sure. I can start. Do you want me to start?
Actually, yeah, if you would take the opportunity to introduce yourself right away here and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can go into the first part of the program, I think.
Sure, I'll just dive in.
Jump right in.
My name is Timur Mustakimov. I'm a pianist. I originally coming from Russia. I studied there in Kazan Conservatory, and then I moved to New York. I studied at Menace College. I did my master's there, and just recently I completed my doctoral studies at Temple University in Philadelphia. So I've been in America for 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So I have some thoughts that I would like to share with you about Pictures and an Exhibition. It's a very dear work for me because I've been playing pictures for many years, and as it was not enough, I've decided to write my dissertation on that topic. It was Pictures and an Exhibition, and one of my colleagues here, Professor Braginsky, was in this panel. I love the work very much, and before we going into the depths and discussion about the uniqueness of the cycle, I think we agreed that it would be a nice idea just to introduce the general outline, the idea of what Pictures at an Exhibition is. I'm sure that our wonderful audience already knows that work pretty well, but if someone doesn't, let me just briefly describe what's happening. So Pictures and an Exhibition by Mussorgsky, it's a suite, a cycle. It's the series of pictures which were composed after the impressions from the works that Mussorgsky saw in the exhibition of his friend Victor Hartmann. He was a very dear friend of Mussorgsky, and he died quite young, was a very talented artist, died when he was 39, and thanks to Stasov, was a very profound, how you would say him, who he was. He was, he played a very important role in lives of composers and artists and writers. So because of Stasov, the posthumous exhibition was organized of works by Hartmann, and Mussorgsky visited this exhibition and was very, very much moved, not only by the work, but maybe also, not maybe, mostly because Hartmann was a very dear friend of Mussorgsky, and it was such a tragic loss for him. And if you allow me, I would like to read a quote from Mussorgsky himself. But I can't find it at the moment, but that's okay. That's okay. It will come a little bit later. So what is so unique about the cycle is that it's a series, as I mentioned already, series of pictures, impressions of the works of Hartmann, but they are connected with so-called promenade, the word itself, like leisure walking. And it gives this very painfully obvious idea of composer just walking from one picture to another. And that what makes it so beautiful. And in my experience, especially with those phenomenal geniuses like Mussorgsky, it's so remarkable to see how a very obvious and simple idea somewhat becomes a revelation. And that was definitely the case with pictures. So all of the pictures, as I said, are connected by the promenade, which is the depiction of Mussorgsky walking from one picture to another. So the promenade sounds like that. And I do have an upright piano, unfortunately, today. So I hope that you would not mind that much. So that's the promenade melody. So as I said already, depiction of Mussorgsky entering the exhibition. So the first picture that he sees is called Nom, and it's this depiction of this dwarf. It's somewhat grotesque, in a way funny, spooky and evil-ish. So Mussorgsky sees the first picture, and then after the piece is finished, we hear another promenade, but now promenade is changing, and that's one of the most unique and interesting details of the cycle. We hear the promenade, the theme is the same, but the promenade changes all the time based on his impression of the work that he saw before. So after the spooky gnome, which ends like this, now we hear Mussorgsky walks away from gnome almost as in shock and quietly. The next picture called Old Castle. It didn't survive. We don't know the picture, but based on the description of Stasov, who was an organizer of that exhibition, the picture that Mussorgsky saw and was impressed so much was the picture of an old castle, and there was a troubadour who was standing in front of it and, you know, in a pose of singing the ballad. I went through the catalog of all Hartmann's works, and I couldn't find anything resembling that image. So it's very possible that maybe something was something inspired Mussorgsky, but his fantasy kind of went further, and Stasov's impression also. So Old Castle sounds like this. After this, we hear again Promenade. Mussorgsky walks from Old Castle to the next piece. The next piece called Tuileries. It's a small park, a little park in Paris, and it's basically a depiction of a playground. So we hear kids, you know, playing with each other. In parentheses, Mussorgsky adds to the description, he writes a dispute between kids. So we can see not only the playing of the kids, but also a little bit of arguing with each other. It's a very sweet, very, very precious little, you know, miniature. That's that. And after, without hearing promenades, it's almost if Mussorgsky just turned his head from this Parisian playground and saw another picture called Bydla. That's the old cart, Polish old cart, a vehicle that would be used by peasants, and it's old and it's crooked wooden, it's squeaky, it's all covered with dirt, and it gives a very heavy impression. So after this somewhat dramatic depiction of the vehicle, we hear again Promenade. We hear Mussorgsky walking from the picture of Bydla, and I do have an interesting observation, and it's very musical, but I think it might be interesting for the general audience as well. The very, very beginning of the motif of Promenade, which sounds like this, have those two notes and then the leap to the third. And what Mussorgsky does after Bydla, he writes the Promenade in minor and also takes those two notes. So he's somewhat taking the kinetic energy of the walk. So we can hear how he's, you know, with bended knees almost, you know, after somewhat shocking image of this Bydla walking very peacefully to the next picture. Then he stumbles upon a humorous picture. It's called "The Dance of Unhatched Chicks." We do have that sketch. It exists. It's survived, and what it is really a sketch of the costumes for kids involved in the ballet. The name of the ballet escapes my mind at the moment, but I do remember that the choreographer was Marius Petipadis, legendary choreographer. So it's very charming, and we can see that, you know, kids just dancing in this, you know, in those strange costumes of unhatched chicks. So that's that. Right after, again without a promenade, as if Mussorgsky would turn his head, he sees another picture. It's called Two Jews. The first one is Samuel Goldenberg, and the second one is Shmuel. What it is, it's a rich Jew and a poor Jew. And an interesting observation: there is no both paintings by Hartmann exist. We can see them, but that's not one painting. So what happened is Mussorgsky kind of clashed both pictures together and created somewhat a conflict of those two characters. So the first, Samuel Goldenberg, sounds like this. And then we hear Shmuel, who is almost begging for the coin. You can't escape the reference to Yurodivy from Boris Godunov, a holy fool who tells the truth. I will talk about this character a little bit later. So the Shmuel sounds like this. Then we hear another promenade, which is reinforced by the left hand. It's practically the same as it was at the very, very beginning. The next piece called Limoges Market. It's again a French place, and it's a remarkably hard piece to pull off, technically somewhat a virtuosic center of the work, very difficult to manage. And but what is really so astonishing about the piece is that it depicts this, you know, beautiful chaos and excitement and of an open market, where people bargaining, where they're arguing with each other, screaming at each other, you know, being happy of making a great deal and all of this. So this wild nature of an open air bazaar. Again, upright piano. I apologize for the sound. The next piece comes again without any preparation. Limoges somewhat hits the next picture, which is called Catacombs. Again, this picture exists. And what it is, Hartmann depicts himself visiting catacombs in Paris, accompanied by his friend and a guide. So we see three figures, one of them holding a lamp in a darkness. It's very gloomy, very dark. Dark picture, and it sounds like this. Then Mussorgsky is doing something quite extraordinary, in my opinion. He introduces the promenade, but promenade is part of the catacombs. It's somewhat a continuation of the same image. There's a very interesting detail, which usually goes unnoticed. At the very bottom right angle of that picture of Catacombs, Hartmann paints a wall of skulls, and they're somewhat, glowing kind of in the darkness. It's a very, very spooky little detail of the Catacombs. And Mussorgsky, inspired by those skulls, he writes this promenade, but he calls it speaking with the dead on the dead language. And it sounds like this. And we hear the same promenade, but in minor. So this tremolo in the right hand, definitely, I would not. I would see that as an obvious reference to this, glowing light in the darkness. So it's very spooky. And actually, one thing that I would like to talk about is the connection, if I have time, about connection with Boris Godunov. There are many editions of the opera, and one of the editions ends with a scene of death of Boris, and the writing of that episode is precisely the same as the one that I've played. So this the theme of death, especially for the romantic composer, and especially for such a tragic romantic Russian composer like Mussorgsky, plays such an important role. So I would say that this is somewhat the very center of the whole cycle. The next piece is called Baba Yaga. It's this violent witch from Russian fairy tales who eats kids for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So this horrible witch, and Mussorgsky depicts her pretty brutally. So after this, horrendous horrific woman, witch, we see the last picture. So here's the final picture, which is called Great Gates of Kiev. We do have, again, lucky to have the picture, the Hartmann's work. So we see again a sketch of the entrance of the big gates for the city of Kiev, which Hartmann was commissioned to design, and it's just a very beautiful kind of ornamented, very Slavic design of the gate. So that's the final piece, which sounds like this. So that's pretty much the layout of the whole composition. And at the end of my speech, let me just share with you just a couple of thoughts. The first one is the idea of physical movement. I think that's what makes this cycle so exciting and so intense and so dynamic, is that Mussorgsky is always depicting the sense of movement, and by movement I mean literal physical movement. So and you can see somewhat three levels of physical movement. The first one, which is the most obvious one, is that we see through promenades Mussorgsky walking from one piece to another. That a suggestion of a movement, a physical movement. The second one is deriving directly from the names of the pieces. If you can see, every name of the piece somewhat suggests again a physical movement. Let's say Bydla, an old cart. We can see that there is a movement of the cart. We see Limoges, people running everywhere. We see Tuileries Garden, which is the depiction of the scene with kids running and playing with each other. We see Baba Yaga, who's trying to lift off and then flying for the next victim. So there's a very strong suggestion of the movement even within the pictures. But on the top of that, there is another suggestion which might not go no obvious way, but most likely deep down on subconscious level, it does, how should I say, it does have an effect on the listener. The titles of the pieces, sometimes Mussorgsky would use French, sometimes he would use Latin, sometimes he would use Italian. So we can even see somewhat a suggestion of the movement from one country to another. A lot of the things happening, for example, in France, bydla, it's a Polish card, and there is some. The more precise name of that piece is Sandomir bydla, which is a very specific location in Poland. Then Great Gates of Kiev, it's Ukraine. So you see, there's a suggestion of the traveling even, although Mussorgsky, to my knowledge, never left Russia. When Hartmann had that opportunity on the special stipend that, you know, talented artists would get to travel to Italy, Holland, most of the times to, you know, study great artists and improve their art. So I think that's what makes the cycle more interesting in a way. The other thing is the connection with let me just say a few words about the portrait of Mussorgsky himself. He was quite a character and a very problematic one. I want to, if you don't mind, read few quotes, and I want them to sink into you and just let it speak on its own. So one of the beautiful quotes that I found very not useful, but very, very good, is by Vladimir Ashkenazy. He's a great Russian pianist, and in his edition to Pictures on Exhibition, he writes this: perhaps the most important and crucial point in understanding this piece is that although it was conceived initially as a programmatic cycle, the result is music that not only goes far beyond mere descriptive qualities, but in fact gives us a penetrating insight into the dark and brooding spirit of Mussorgsky, or for that matter, of Russia itself. I think I'm running out of time, and let me just conclude my little presentation is that when I had a chance to study that work, not only as a pianist but as a somewhat scholar, when I was reading a lot of, for example, books written by Western musicologists, I found that quite fascinating to see that there is a very, very obvious clash of Western music world with Eastern music world. This kind of a clash, Western, in this case, precisely Western versus Russian. And allow me just to read one last quote by Gerald Abraham. He's a musicologist and authority on Mussorgsky. And he writes this: as a musical translator of words and all that can be expressed in words, of psychological states and even physical movement, he's unsurpassed. Mussorgsky is unsurpassed. As an absolute musician, he was hopelessly limited with remarkably little ability to construct pure music or even purely musical texture. I find this somewhat, to put it very politely, fascinating how, musicians in the Western world would acknowledge the fact that Mussorgsky is not a great representation of pure, for example, counterpoint, or something that, for example, Brahms was obsessed with, or Schubert or Beethoven. And they would, in the same breath, use a wonderful compliment, and then they would use the words hopelessly limited, which is addressed to one of the greatest composers of all time. And that, I stand against that very much. I do not tolerate that, and always in the discussions always try to come sort of as an advocate of Mussorgsky, like he needs one even. He's such a fantastic musician, and I think he is a quintessence of Russian, kind of dark, brooding, as Ashkenazy says here, dark, bloody, awkward, sometimes ugly, very deep and tragic depiction of so-called enigmatic Russian soul. So I hope that it was to a certain extent interesting to you, and thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to talk with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timur. It was a very interesting presentation, and I would like to mention that at the very first recital at the Music at the Museum concert series at the Museum of Russian Art, I chose Pictures and Exhibition as the opening piece because, of course, this is one of the most iconic compositions, not only in the Russian music and not only in the piano repertoire, but probably in the entire history of classical music. And of course, that's also the reason why I chose this piece as a subject for our first conversation, because again, it's great piece, of course, and what I like about this piece, it's also it could be like arguable, you know, different people, as Timur mentioned, might have little different opinions about the piece. Some people prefer original piano version, some people prefer orchestrated version by Ravel, some people would like to focus on innovations, musical innovations of Mussorgsky. Some people prefer to think more about his images. And for example, I personally like the best in Mussorgsky's music is not his innovations, but his mission as a composer and as an artist. And I would probably disagree with Timur a little bit, because he did not only portray the darker side of Russian soul or Russia, but of course his music is darker than music of Borodin or Rimsky-Korsakov or maybe even Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky. But what I think about his music is that his support and of the Russian people, like of the lower classes, you know, as we know, in the 19th century, there was, of course, the Tsar, there was, of course, aristocracy, and but there was also majority of the population of Russia was like peasants and workers, and pretty often, you know, their life was very miserable, and many Russian writers like Dostoevsky, Nekrasov dedicated their work writing about these problems. And of course there's also famous Russian painters and the group of painters called I think they're called
Передвижники.
Передвижники, yes, and they also dedicated their lives talking by means of visual art with the people about the problems of our society and problems of social injustice, you know, and I really feel like they really wanted our country to become better and more prosperous and more beautiful, and that's part of the reason why we had revolution in 1917. So unlike Dostoevsky, who was very close to Orthodox religion, and he didn't accept the idea of revolution, and probably Mussorgsky didn't talk about it, but definitely people, you know, there was demand for social change in the society. And that's what I think Mussorgsky, in every of his pieces, Boris Godunov, Havanshina, vocal cycles, pictures in the exhibition, and other works, it was very clear that he loved Russia, but he also was, he had like lots of pain for his country. So he didn't want to portray it dark, but he just wanted to portray it the way so people would think and try to change it a little bit. Okay, and thank you very much. And probably now I would like to talk a little bit about Victor Hartmann and his works. And this work inspired Mussorgsky to create this wonderful cycle. And probably Timur can say a little bit about these works. And I would also like to show some pictures, some artworks by Hartmann.
Yes.
So on the top left you can see the little clock, and I think that it designed as a head on the chicken hen's legs. So that's the first picture inspired Mussorgsky for creating the piece, the Baba Yaga and head on the hen's legs. And the second picture is a project of his costume for ballet production, and that's you can see the dance of Unhatched chicken. And on the right side you can see the project of his Great Gates in Kiev. Unfortunately, this project was never came to life. And in the bottom row you can see, on the left you can see the portrait of a rich Jew, and on the right side you can see the portrait of the poor Jew, and in the middle you can see the painting about catacombs in Paris. And you can see on the right side there is some skulls. And so I think that's all we have from Hartmann's artworks. So on this picture you can also see some of Hartmann's other works. So he was acclaimed stage designer. He worked for Bolshoi and Mariinsky theaters, and you can see on the top and the bottom left you can see his set designs for Ruslan and Lyudmila, the famous opera by Mikhail Glinka. And on the bottom right side, you can see his building in Moscow. That's, I think, the only building survived, and this was building a printing factory for Sava Mamontov, the famous Russian sponsor and art supporter. And probably now we can move on to the next chapter of our conversation, and it's going to be some kind of analysis of musical language. And I would like Professor Shaw to tell us about it. And Professor Shaw is a classical concert pianist. He was born in Jamaica, and then after winning a major competition, he moved to New York and he received his doctoral, bachelor, master's and doctoral degrees at Juilliard School. And he's a Steinway artist, and also he's a wonderful professor, and I really enjoyed his classes at the University of Minnesota, and I'm very honored and happy that he joined us today. And in the 90s he presented a recital at Tedman Concert Hall, dedicated to these pictures at the exhibition. And so I'm looking forward to hear his ideas about this wonderful music.
Thank you, Denis. And it's an honor and a pleasure actually to participate in this conversation, being the only one of us who is not Russian. So it's indeed an honor and a privilege to be invited. A lot of, or not a lot, but some of what Timur has said was also the direction in which I was looking. And thank you, Timur, for giving us an overview of each piece and setting the context for what I'm about to say. I'm going to be speaking sort of from behind the scenes a little bit. So now you know what happens in the foreground when you look at the pictures, but my analysis, or I wouldn't necessarily call it an analysis, but a behind the scenes look at the piece. I would begin by saying something that is somewhat, perhaps a little bit controversial, but it will stimulate more conversation. I would say that in terms of sheer pianistic firepower, Mussorgsky's picture at an exhibition cannot compete with Liszt's Transcendental Etudes, Balakirev's notorious fingerbuster Islame, or General Martin's The Finger Breaker. In fact, if we examine each technical element in the piece on its own, there's hardly anything remarkable to see or hear. No wonder Maurice Ravel, in his more famous 1922 orchestral transcription, and Vladimir Horowitz in his enhanced piano solo version dated 1947, felt the urge to dress up or at least touch up the original for public display. Mussorgsky indeed takes us on a journey, and I like what Timur said about this constant motion and these elements of motion in the piece. I use the word journey, but it was neither the first nor will it be the last. He will neither be the first nor the last to take us on this premise of travel or motion. Bach took us on an emotional journey in the Capriccio on the departure of a beloved brother. Schubert took us on a psychological journey in Winterreise. Liszt's Année de Pèlerinage is essentially a travel journal. Debussy's Postcards, Estampe, revisits impressions of exotic places. Samuel Barber's Excursions give us a taste of Americana. Duke Ellington even invites us to take the A train, and so on. This geographical emblem is certainly evident in Mussorgsky's title references, and Timur referred to this. The fact that the titles are in many different languages. I mean, there's Russian, there's French, there's Italian, Polish, Yiddish, and the lingua mortuis Latin to describe each of the 10 pictures. To me, it demonstrates a social and cultural autonomy of the mind. Mussorgsky takes the time to take us beyond the boundaries of Russia. As Denis is saying, you know, he has this love for Russia, and he's more interested. In other words, there isn't a xenophobic approach, but there is a looking at the wider world. So in a way, the pictures at an exhibition is not just a journey through the pictures or a tour of the pictures. It's a looking beyond the scope of his own indigenous culture. Now, we have already looked at the pictures and seen, you know, what each one is and what the titles are actually describing. But now, my behind the scenes look, I'm going to examine the historical catalog of compositional devices, techniques, styles, and genres that thrive side by side, as far as I know, in no solo piano work other than Mussorgsky's unique pictures at an exhibition. Today, time will only allow me to focus on 2 or 3 items as I flip through the catalog, Mussorgsky's technical catalog, consisting of mixed meters, sforzandi accentuation, variation form, cyclic form, thematic transformation, an Italian Siciliano, alternating hand techniques, repeated note technique, tremolo effects, bird chirps and trills reminiscent of Rameau's Le Rappel des Oiseaux or Dakin's Le Coucou, a recitative, and the beboum clavichord technique a la Beethoven. The list goes on. I will start with the most pervasive feature of the work, as Timur mentioned, the Promenade and all its iterations. Then I will point out one characteristic that is somewhat obvious and one that is not. Mussorgsky was particularly pleased with the results of the opening Promenade, representing his heavy-set physiognomy strolling through the gallery. You might compare it, however, to a Baroque preludium, a grand and stately proclamation serving as a curtain-raising overture to a larger work. But also note the use of mixed meter. While the constant change of time signature might be commonplace, even pedestrian for the 20th and 21st century composer, it is most unusual for the 19th century. Despite what we hear in Brahms, sometimes Brahms goes back and forth between 2s and 3s in his hemiolas and in his asymmetrical phrasing. But here it is, Mussorgsky starts off with 5 plus 6. Each measure, there's a 5/4 measure, then a 6/4 measure, a 5/4 measure, and then a 6/4 measure. So this phrase cycle marks the far-flung distances and the long strides the composer must walk through a voluminous physical space. So here are the 10, let's do my math correctly. 5 plus 6 is 11, the 11 beats. So 5 are the first 5, and then the next 6 are. So you notice that he repeats one pattern. So he goes. So you get this feeling of stepping forward, and then he repeats a step and then proceeds. So there is kind of, to me, there is a certain realism to this. The motion that Timur spoke of is actually realized in the beat pattern and in the phrase pattern of the Promenade. Mussorgsky even goes as far, he actually misses a step at one point, and he indicates it in the score, where he has the phrase pattern goes 2 measures of 6 beats, and then he has a measure of 5 beats, and then there's a rest, kind of a hesitation, and then he goes back to 6 beats. So you have 6, 6, 5, 6. And the impression we get from that is of him missing a step. Here we go. So he goes from here. So it's as if he interrupts the phrase, interrupts his step, and he skips and then moves on. So there, in the very beat pattern, there is this feeling of someone walking. Variants of the Promenade theme regulates the pacing of our arrival at each picture, as Timur said, and it actually sets up the view or the walk away from one picture to the next. And to point out another technique, he actually has the theme in the next example of the Promenade. It becomes kind of a cantus firmus. It's in the left hand, and then there's a harmonization on top. Right? And that style actually goes all the way back to the Venetian composers of the 16th century, where they take an existing theme and there is a choral harmonization on top of it. The composer Gabrielli comes to mind. And what better way to set up the next piece, whose title is in Italian, Il Vecchio Castello, which is the old castle. And this brings me to the obvious comment. This is obviously an Italian sensibility, because the rhythm of the old castle is a Siciliano. This is a typical rhythm of the Siciliano. And then we hear the troubadour singing above that. So it's Italian in style, and it's Italian by title, and it's in G sharp minor. So it has all of the typical attributes of a Sicilian. This brings me to something that I mentioned before, that this, I don't know if you will hear this anywhere else, but I discovered something that maybe the musicologists can do all of the investigation. There are things like this that I see in a lot of music. And I guess maybe it's because right now I have a student working on a piece by Beethoven that is similar to this. I'm going to go to number 6. It's Samuel Goldenberg and Shmuel, the two Jews, the rich Jew and the poor Jew. And the rich Jew, here is his theme. Now here's the theme for the poor Jew. Sorry, I'm reading. Now listen to this. pianists among us will realize that the second excerpt that I'm playing is from Beethoven's 31st sonata. Beethoven wrote 32 piano sonatas. And this is the piano sonata, opus 110 in A flat major, third movement. I think that you know, here it is that Mussorgsky has what is essentially a recitative for the rich Jew. Right? So the recitative is a musical example where one is sort of speaking. And here Beethoven has, in the same key, a musical recitative. And not only that, for the second Jew, the poor Jew, where we go, that actually is a technique that is used on the clavichord, where the hammers on a clavichord are so connected to the keys that you can actually tremble. The word bebung actually means tremble. It's the word for tremble in German. You can actually tremble on the key, and the hammer hits, sort of rubs the key and creates a kind of vibrato. And this vibrato that we hear here, where Mussorgsky adds a little bit of a turn after it, the repeated note, is similar to Beethoven's use of the bebung, the tremble, on the very same pitch. And I can't help but think that Mussorgsky borrows or sees this technique of Beethoven as an opportunity to depict what he's trying to show in his pictures. And I think that's very interesting. And I think that is indicative of a lot of what he does. He uses all of the techniques known to keyboard players and keyboard composers to realize the images that he's trying to depict. I mean, I could go on and on. The busyness of the marketplace at Limoges, when he does, you know, this whole idea of alternating hands, you know, that's something that we see all over in Rachmaninoff, in Mendelssohn. You know, it's all over the place. This is of alternating hands. But the way he voices and the way he harmonizes, it creates this idea of busyness. So he takes something that is pre-existing, a pre-existing technique, and he turns it to his own purposes. Let me find my place. I think that one of the most remarkable things I think about this piece is how Mussorgsky brings the theme of the promenade back at the very end within the Great Gate of Kiev. It's an example, I think, of what is referred to among theoreticians as thematic transformation. All the way through the piece, as Timur said, you know, there are references to the promenade. So we hear the promenade theme, and there are variations on it, but little by little, you know, as Mussorgsky is making this motion towards the great climax, which is the Great Gate of Kiev. This theme, the promenade that takes us through the entire work, is brought back. I mean, Liszt was known for doing that. I mean, in fact, this is one of Liszt's strengths. Whenever he had in his larger works, one of the ways that he developed the work and carried it forward was to have this transformation of his themes. So the theme would be a unifying force, but then the transformation would show that you have traveled, that you have made some motion towards some ending. And this is what's remarkable, that Mussorgsky shows. Let me play that for you. So just before the very end, is this kind of thematic transformation is not so much like Liszt, it's more like César Franck, because it's kind of the apotheosis of the piece. It's where everything comes to a climax. So he has this, so let's see here. Maybe I should try that again. Let's see here. And this technique, actually, we hear it in Chopin, for instance. Where the composer travels all over the keyboard and hits the melody note on the top, you know, so. Right? So this is kind of, this is where the piece comes to a climax. And you notice the scale where I think Mussorgsky transcends the technical elements is his incredible sense of orchestration. You know, Ravel is a great orchestrator with the actual orchestra, but I think that Mussorgsky is a great orchestrator on the keyboard, because look, he takes a scale and goes. So there's this kind of building of volume. So it becomes a sonority rather than a technical exercise.
Yes. Okay.
Now, the closing comments that I'll make is that Mussorgsky's professional colleagues of one school of composition or another were puzzled by the novelty of pictures at an exhibition, and perhaps missed its impact because they were signed up for a different tour of the work. The private tour of the work is reserved for pianists who choose to perform it. One music critic astutely observed that pictures at an exhibition is fiendishly difficult. Speaking from experience, I think that the difficulties lie in the diverse technical elements spanning the entire history of keyboard playing that one has to manage. The lightning quick shifts in mood and style that are required, and the cumulative strain of having to assemble the entire exhibition before the viewer's eyes in real time. It's sort of like performance art. So you're actually creating the work as you go. You may also be wondering what this musical tour de force of the imagination has to do with the visual artist and the Museum of Russian Art, beyond Victor Hartmann's pictorial inspiration. I submit that in composing pictures at an exhibition, Mussorgsky reciprocates. Hartmann provides the inspiration for Mussorgsky. Mussorgsky provides the inspiration for the visual artist. His innovative resuscitation of found musical artifacts in the lingua mortuis of dead composers forms a magnificent assemblage of monumental scope and proportion, a veritable inspirational model for visual artists anywhere and everywhere. Forget the idea of firepower. Forget pianistic pyrotechnics. Mussorgsky is an architectural genius here. He is the architectural genius, not of space and scale, but of sound and insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shaw. And I would like to give the opportunity for my professor, dear Professor Alexander Braginsky, to say final comments before we answer the questions. And Professor Braginsky was born in Moscow, and he studied at Moscow Conservatory with legendary Alexander Goldenberg, who was a friend of Rachmaninoff and Leo Tolstoy, and he was just unbelievable bridge to the 19th century. And also he studied with Theodor Gutmann, and then he moved to United States, and he traveled a lot, performing and teaching the most prestigious venues and music festivals. And he also performs with his wife, Tanya Remennikova, who is a wonderful cellist and student of Mstislav Rostropovich. And so I'm really looking forward to hear Professor's comments on this music.
Oh, thank you, Denis. I really don't know how much time I have left, because maybe all I have time to do is to say hi and wish everybody happy, what is today, Tuesday. Because I didn't want to talk much, but I did want to raise a couple of questions that interest me and not directly related to the text of this piece. So I'll start, and then you just stop me when the time comes to stop. Well, it was, as you said, it was a great idea to open this with pictures at an exhibition at the Russian Museum of Art, because these are the pictures at an exhibition and this is the museum. And I always believed, and I do believe very strongly, in the connection between the arts. Nothing exists in vacuum in the world of art or in any other world, I think, but there is no understanding of music, any kind of music, without being exposed to the visual art and understanding paintings of any kind, or a dance, or architecture, or, as now I believe, science. So the influence of this inter-influence of the arts is everything. And what interests me in this particular piece in Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, and by the way, I have to say that in the Soviet Union, we always used to say Mussorgsky, because in Russian language, you never know where the stress is unless you know. But my teacher, who was 6 years old when Mussorgsky died, so he was much closer to that time, he insisted that it should be Mussorgsky and not Mussorgsky. So in any case, what amazed me there is how little there is in common between the paintings that ostensibly, and we know it's for sure, it's inspired Mussorgsky to write this work, and the music itself. And that, of course, brings a larger question, and that's what I wanted to talk about and to think about, is the miracle of inspiration, how something that is fairly mediocre, which I consider Hartmann pictures to be in every way. They lack imagination. I mean, he couldn't come up with a Baba Yaga's hat better than this little piece that you can put on a mantelpiece of your fireplace, or the great gates of Kiev that could go the same place as a little bijou, as they say in French, and the monumental, larger than life music and images that it inspired. And this would bring me, if I could talk about it, bring me to that, that what genius really is, how genius is different from talent. Because there are many talented people, and the Mighty Five were all extremely talented. And I'm sure that Stasov was a gifted man. And yet Mussorgsky was a genius. And he had a vision like a Beethoven in his time, who was a genius. A genius sees far, far ahead. And Mussorgsky music, to me, speaks not of Hartmann little paintings, but it speaks to our generation that went to the movies and saw Star Wars and saw Lord of the Rings. And when I listen to this music, this is what I see, this huge reality. You know, Mussorgsky creates a world out of being inspired by something fairly insignificant. On that note, I also want to say that you are right when you said that there are wonderful light moments in the pictures. But the most important part of it is that the good triumphs over evil in a major way in this work. The Great Gates of Kiev is really a cosmic triumph of good and light over evil and darkness that is represented by Baba Yaga, who is attacking that world of good. And then she's, in my imagination, she's bursting into flames just at the appearance of the holy city of Kiev. So it is true that some composers, some artists were more religious than others. Yet they all were religious. Religion was a major part of their life. And it was for Mussorgsky as much as for anybody. And I know it certainly was for my teacher, Goldenberg. And that's what his music reflected. It's a progression from the darkness that starts with the first frame of Gnome, the Gnomus, because I see it as a movie frames. And it ends in this incredible flood of light covering the whole world. So some other time we will talk about it at more length, but I was thinking of paintings sometime are wonderful. For example, David Gaspar Friedrich's influence, as we think we know over Beethoven, we can see that. But in this case, Mussorgsky just took a flight there and was way ahead of his time. And by the way, the same goes for orchestrations of his works or any attempt to brush it up and bring it to civilized form. To me, Ravel's orchestration, again, misses the whole point of the work, of the original. And Mussorgsky orchestration version of Boris Godunov is so far superior Rimsky and whoever else did. So on this note, I just want to say I'm very happy to be here with everybody and talk about it, and I hope we will continue.
Is there any better way to sum up than what Professor Braginsky just said? My goodness.
Thank you very much, Professor Braginsky.
So to our panel, Denis, I just want to interrupt real quick. We are just at 12:15, so I know a lot of you may feel like you're set to go. But any of us we can sit here and answer questions if you like. There's no strict end point as far as Zoom goes, and this is all going to be posted. This session has been recorded. I know that there's one thing that I would like to bring before I hand it back to Denis, is that I think with an audience of such a wide variety of experience with this piece and maybe classical music in general, whether they are musicians or enjoyers or anywhere in between, where would our panel point our audience to go now with all of this knowledge, listen to pictures at an exhibition? Any recommendations of recordings?
Who are you asking?
Well, I'll start with you, Professor.
Oh, I personally still think that probably Horowitz would rank very, very high up there. Byron Janis, who was Horowitz's pupil, did a fantastic performance, which I was lucky to hear live in Moscow when he came to the Soviet Union. And actually, I heard all three of my colleagues playing pictures, and they were wonderful in their own way. And I'm sure they're somewhere out there in the cosmic world of internet, and just go and listen to as many as you can.
Mm-hmm.
One that is very interesting to me, I don't remember the date of the recording, but it's a Viatoslav Reader. And I remember my first awareness of the work was when I was at the Juilliard School, and one of our music criticism professors played back to back the Horowitz 1947 recording and the Richter recording, and was quite adamant about saying really that he preferred the Richter recording because it seemed to him to be more Russian, and it had the starkness and the purity that Mussorgsky is able to convey. The version that he played of Horowitz was the version that he touched up. In the Great Gate of Kiev, Horowitz adds a lot of, sort of things sort of give us a kind of grand climax. But Richter sticks to the text as it is. But having brought that up, Alex, you said such a mouthful. I mean, there's so much there that we could talk on and on about. And I do agree with you. This idea of transcendence, the fact that Mussorgsky transcended the evil. I mean, this is fantastic that you would say something like that. And I think this whole idea of genius, it's this ability to see something greater than the ordinary things that piece together our lives. So this idea, the analogy I make is of a collage where you take these, as I said, these found elements, and the elements themselves are very mundane, but what the genius is able to see and what the genius is able to construct or come to from the ordinary, so that the ordinary becomes the extraordinary. This is what this piece teaches us. And this is how it instructs us actually as artists, that we should always be looking to see beyond the ordinary. The genius, I don't know. Only few of us ever achieve that or ever are endowed with that. And certainly Mussorgsky was one of them.
Okay, thank you very much. I would add probably, I would suggest everyone, before listening pictures at an exhibition, also listen some other Mussorgsky works, because I truly believe that his operas are superior than pictures. And unfortunately, they are not as well known because they're in Russian, and some people, especially nowadays, when every opera is supposed to be performed in a native language, it's very hard to stage Mussorgsky because his librettos are have very old-fashioned language, and it's, for many singers, it's very hard to understand. And the operas are very long, and probably that's why one of the reasons why they are not as popular as they're supposed to be. I would add maybe old Russian recording by a great Russian conductor, Nikolai Golovanov, and I would probably consider it as a most authentic performance, because Golovanov was a great composer and he was a conductor of the Bolshoi Theater, and he staged all Mussorgsky's completed operas, and he was composer himself, and so I would suggest this recording.
Timur, do you have anything to add?
There's so much, really to talk about. It's when we do those things, it's very inspirational to hear, your colleagues, and it provokes you to think maybe in new ways. I can't agree with everyone. It's really something very, very special with pictures. One thing that Professor Braginsky mentioned about Ravel missing the whole point, I cannot agree with that more, because it's somewhat historical anecdote that pictures became more popular and more well known through the orchestration, which is not complementing the work at all. It's missing the point precisely. It has nothing to do with the original work, which is significantly stronger and more powerful on the piano because of its percussive nature. I think that's the to put it very simply. We did have that conversation again with Professor Braginsky before. Well, we didn't have a conversation. We just hinted that this kind of a clash of Hartmann and Mussorgsky, maybe it's just because I spent so much time with pictures and an exhibition and writing on it, and also with Hartmann because of my friend who is a specialist in artists of the second half of the 19th century, and she was talking about Hartmann a lot. And those pictures that Denis showed, they're actually kind of interesting because I don't think that any pianist saw them. And it's I don't know, I have this instinct to somewhat say something nice about Hartmann itself, because there's nothing really you can add about pictures because they're so remarkable and so genius. I think there is somewhat unfair competition that is set up by Mussorgsky himself with Hartmann, and not only and the first obvious thought, and the one that Alexander put so firmly, is that it's simply the matter of who is talent and who is genius. I agree with that, but there's also a problem here, because Hartmann's sketches and everything that I've seen, they don't exist in a monumental rail. He's very, very, what is that? The ornamented, very. I'm missing the word.
Bijou.
When you do, yes, when you do the for example, maybe jewelry or little, things. What is that word? Well, you get what I'm trying to say. It's in other words, those huge forms and monumentalism of some decorative. Thank you, somebody, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. Yeah, he's a decorative artist, and to compare decorative artists to this giant of Mussorgsky is just, you know, it would be a lost game for Hartmann. Anyways, I don't know. I feel almost as I would be related to Hartmann myself. That's why I'm trying. I'm always defending him when we're talking with Alexander Iosifovich about him. But putting Hartmann aside, about the pictures, one thing that I really liked, Paul, you said something very specific. You were talking about reference to Gabrieli in the second promenade, when the theme is on the bottom and then there's this kind of a choir construct on the top, and I think it was just dead on and spot on. I really like this. And you know, maybe there is no actual reference to Gabrieli, but I think you kind of sense that there is something in common in terms of this holiness, you know, and very, very church-like sound of the promenade itself. When I started working on it, the fact that there is a melody, tam pam pam ta ta tam ta ta, and then the choir is answering, immediately pushed me into the idea of making a reference to the church liturgy. And I actually had even a friend of mine, she's a musicologist who, like, very brainy. And I said to her, listen, I do feel that it's called Zapev, and then the answer of the choir, it's part of the Orthodox liturgy. But she said, you know, you should give up on that because all of the terms and all that is just such a forest. It's very, very difficult to understand all of that. And I kind of gave up. But it does have that suggestion of a church, suggestion of holiness in the promenade itself. And I think with Gabrieli reference, you really stroke something very important. At least, like, to me, it kind of hit the spot, and I really like that. So I guess that's what I wanted to just tell.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I cannot be silent too, because I would like to say a couple of words to advocate Rimsky-Korsakov, who, in my opinion, was as great as Mussorgsky, and he was just a little different. It's kind of like some people prefer Brahms and some people prefer Wagner. You know, it's like they're different. It's like dogs and cats. You know, some people likes dogs, some people likes cats, and their influence, for example, for French Impressionist composers were this, you know, equally important, and also 20th century Russian composers. And of course, we also have to thank Rimsky-Korsakov for spending years of his life completing Mussorgsky's unfinished works, orchestrating. And when we read Rachmaninoff's and other musicians' letters, they all agree that Rimsky-Korsakov orchestration was better than original one. So I would support.
Denis, one thing that I forgot to mention, I think everybody would have a kick out of this fact. I found that Alexandrovich, you might enjoy that even more, and here's why. So the story goes this way: when Hartmann was alive, and Mussorgsky and Hartmann, they were, you know, quite friendly with. They were friends. Right. There was a masked ball, like a masquerade, at some point, and I don't remember in which letter that information was, but what they did, everyone who came to that ball had to dress up in some costume, and Hartmann appeared to be dressed as Baba Yaga, and every guest would have this kind of a grand entrance to the main living room. So they opened the door, and he violently kind of, you know, like rushed into the room with people with, you know, holding broom between his legs, and Mussorgsky was there. And I thought that maybe it has to do something. Maybe it's connected.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful story, and I never heard it, and that absolutely could be.
And on the top of that, just to continue with this idea of you know, dressing up in costumes, I bumped into this. I think it was a book. I think Richter was Richter, this great Soviet Russian pianist. He was talking about going to the masked party as well with Rostropovich to the widow of Bulgakov, Yelena Sergeyevna, if I'm not mistaken. They were dressed, Rostropovich and Richter were dressed like crocodiles. And when she opened the door, what they were doing, they were laying on the ground, you know, covered by this huge costume of a crocodile. It was hilarious. It was just so funny how they were laying on the ground, both, you know, covered with this huge costume of a crocodile. It was just so funny.
That's entirely 100% believable. I knew both of them, and they were absolutely up to it. Very quickly about Hartmann. The only thing that I have to keep in mind and repeat, that there is a monumental art, and there is this bijou, the decorative art. And when the size has nothing to do with it, because you can blow up a piece of jewelry to cosmic proportions, and it will be a huge, big piece of jewelry.
Yes, so I guess so.
So Mussorgsky was a monumentalist in his nature, and Hartmann was not. And so
I agree. Yeah.
To me, that's only an issue of something of this kind influencing something that is so far greater and of a different kind altogether. So that's all. That's the question that I
need to run my DNA test. We can do that. It most likely I have like Hartmann in my blood. Some, you know, where every time you speak about him in that way, I had this very, you know, like itching urge to defend him.
All right. No, I apologize. I didn't want to offend your ancestors. No.
What a delight you all are. I thank you. I can't thank you enough on behalf of the museum for lending your time and your expertise. It's so fun to be able to delve in deep. I don't think you, I can't say enough how grateful I am. Denis, thank you for gathering everyone together. For those of you, yeah, you know, we have, Denis and I have been working together for some years, and Denis has done a lot of work at the museum prior to even me being here as well. And if you've never been to a classical music concert at the Museum of Russian Art, please try to make it happen if you're local, when it's safe, of course. We hope this fall, but you know, we'll wait till it is safe. It's quite an experience. It's a beautiful place, and you've done so much work as a wonderful colleague and a wonderful partner. So we'll look forward to who our next Russian composer is and next great masterpiece that we'll sit down and talk about, right? Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
Have a great day, everyone. This is going to be posted on our website. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.
And thank you.